Could you explain your role in the Kansas City, Missouri School District during the years between 1971 and 1997?
My role in the Kansas City, Missouri School District during 1971 and 1997, I was a kindergarten student at E.F. Swinney Elementary in September of 1993.
Wow, 1993.
1993, almost 23 years ago.
Okay. And what year did you graduate?
I graduated high school in 2006 from Lincoln Prep.
Okay.
What I remember as a student was a lot of challenges. I grew up off of 26th and Line, and I can remember a lot of my friends going to various neighborhood schools, and I was bused to E.F. Swinney. E.F. Swinney is located west of the Country Club Plaza. So I remember a lot of long hours on bus rides to and from school. Also, I remember with the integration movement that everyone did not look like me. Sometimes I felt that I was welcome, and then sometimes it was a sense of, you can tell from the other students in the building that they were not used to seeing faces of color. From my earliest memories, I remember the efforts that were put in place in school was, I would say, the transportation. But the issues that I felt transportation faced was that if, for example, myself, if I was suspended from the school bus or after school program, my parents were not, it was not easily accessible for them to reach me. I remember my school was approximately 45 minutes from my house. And I remember those long bus rides. And I remember that E.F. Swinney was the math and science magnet. And my mother wanted me to go to the neighborhood schools. And at first it was a struggle with enrollment to actually get me into E.F. Swinney, the math and science magnet. But I was fortunate enough to attend there because my sister was already there. She's in fact 4 years older than me. So when I was in kindergarten, my sister was in 5th grade.
Okay, so they try to keep siblings together?
They tried to keep siblings together, which I found that it was really nice, going to school with my sister. I felt protected as far as on the school bus. My sister always looked out for me, still to this day took care of me, and really watched out for me. But I also remember that if it was an incident between myself and another student of a different color, that sometimes depending on the teacher or the staff member at the time, it could always be looked at as my fault. I believe it was mixed feelings, to integrate schools. Change is not always good for people. I believe the biggest holdup was that, they would bus us out to these schools that were miles away from our homes instead of actually pouring more money into the inner city schools in our neighborhoods to actually fix them up and provide resources. I can remember my mother, one of my mother's best friends being a teacher within the district, and she felt that actually the neighborhood schools were actually probably better for me. However, my mom really didn't have a choice. And so in busing me out to E.F. Swinney, my mom had to almost trust, different races, different colors. And for her, I would say parents. You may not have felt so much of a racial gap between the staff members, but you can tell at programs and plays that were put on our playground that, when it was a race barrier, they were not used to African Americans being in their neighborhoods and being around their children.
Okay, that was interesting. So what neighborhood school were you close to?
I was close to Harmon Weeks and Sanford B. Ladd. Those were the two schools I was close to. Okay. And both schools are closed currently. After speaking with my mom, she said each school had a certain percentage that had to be bussed out. I believe that it was not a lot of choice. And so in trying to enroll me into a neighborhood school, it was not an option for her to enroll me in a neighborhood school. It was almost as if, hey, you have to be bussed out to this school. In my instance, my circumstance, I was fortunate enough to attend E.F. Swinney. I believed at the time they had an excellent principal in Dr. Phyllis Washington. And that provided me with the opportunity to really focus in on math and science. And my mom believes that is why my state scores and my test scores later on in high school, I was very strong in the areas of math and science.
Yeah,
Any time anyone asks me about my experiences at E.F. Swinney, I always say I had a great principal. I had a really great principal. I believe it's similar to attitudes today as far as integration. Change is just, sometimes it's viewed as good and sometimes it's viewed as bad. I remember the staff members who were really excited to see us come to school every day, and I remember, some staff members were kind of a little bit on edge because they were integrating a lot of African Americans into all white schools. And so at that time during that integration process, there were a lot of challenges, and not only challenges with the students coming in, but challenges with the parents as well. I believe one fear sometimes with educators is how do you adapt and how do you receive, students as well as parents of different races. One example, and it wasn't so much with staff, but with another parent. I remember having a play on our blacktop at E.F. Swinney, and I can remember standing by a Caucasian peer and their parent kind of pulling them, away from me. And at the time, I really did not, know a lot. As I stated, I attended E.F. Swinney September 1993. I was a kindergarten student, and I did not know a lot about race. But those were conversations that I had to have with my mother at home as to, why he couldn't necessarily stand by me, or why did his parent, look or view me as a certain, individual. And I didn't really understand at the time, and I understand now. But at that time, when you're bringing change in, the world is just not ready for those type of changes. I attended E.F. Swinney from September 1993 until 1997, I believe, before I attended Boca Elementary. K through 3 was at E.F. Swinney, and then 4th and 5th grade was at Boca Elementary. Some of the attitudes of the students, some were very welcoming. However, some attitudes of the students, and as well as attitudes of African American students as well, it was just change. In the neighborhood I grew up in, there was not a lot of color in my neighborhood, except for African Americans and Hispanics. And so being bused so far from my home, it's change. You're not used to seeing students of a different race. I do believe the staff at E.F. Swinney tried to teach and be very culturally responsive. However, it's different, and so it's a lot of conversations. I had some students who received me. I can remember some of my close friends were Caucasian. However, some of the Caucasian students in the building as well were not very receptive because I did not look like them. I do not know if that may have played a role of a home influence or just being different overall. As far as Hispanics and other races, I do believe Hispanics were more welcoming because we did have a lot of Hispanic families in our neighborhood in the inner city, so they were bussed out as well. I remember having a conversation with my grandfather, and at the time my grandfather's from Batesville, Arkansas, and he only received a second grade education before he had to unfortunately drop out of school and work to provide for the family. And one thing our family values, or one thing my family instilled in me was that race should not play a factor. So my parents and especially my grandfather always try to put in my heart to accept other races, know that even though I'm not attending my neighborhood school where my friends who I play with on the street every day attend, and I missed out on a lot of valuable relationships, but at the time I feel like I was contributing to a bigger picture. When you think of Martin Luther King and you think of other civil rights activists, this was the goal, where we all can play together, live together, be treated fairly together, and have equitable and equality as far as education. Efforts to integrate schools affected my role in the district because a lot of my friends went to our neighborhood school. So I believe I missed out on a lot of opportunities to build social relationships with my neighbors. It put a kind of a divided line. Some of my friends I were able to still play with on the street as well, but I believe our neighborhood and our community started to separate. Families did not know each other. It used to be that, if someone down the street said something to you, you know, it was okay because they knew your mother. And that was because we all went to school together. And I do think when those efforts were put into place, it divided up our communities. And I believe our communities even now today are, as I would say, are receiving, I don't want to say pushback, but it's resulting from the deseg movement.
Okay. Tell me a little bit more about that in terms of the communities and their status today as a result of the deseg movement.
I believe the communities today are very divided. When, you know, regardless if it's the Black Lives Matter movements and various different things, a dialogue that I had with several other professionals earlier this week, we were speaking about how during the civil rights movement, they did not have so many technology and social media outlets, and everyone could come together and it'd be thousands and almost millions of people marching together. And now when protests are organized and various different things in relation to race, we're separated. It may be a protest on 27th and Prospect, and then it's another protest different on the plaza. And so we're divided. It's almost a theory that, you know, now we don't build front porches, you know, we build back decks. And the communities today, in a result of the deseg movement, are very divided. Neighbors do not know each other. A lot of times you have issues with another person in your community and may not even know that they're related to you. And you know, it's sometimes they say it's that 6 degrees of separation, and the deseg movement really divided our communities. I do believe that, you know, families used to be really close. People could sleep on porches and leave doors unlocked. And now it's as if our community and each other, we don't even know each other. We're scared to give each other a compliment, or if someone gives you a compliment, you're more worried about, are they trying to rob me, or is it negative, or are they trying to be malicious? And I do believe that is a result of the deseg movement. Our community is very divided as of right now. I do believe E.F. Swinney, again, had great leadership under Dr. Washington. I believe student outcomes, as far as myself, I can remember entering first grade and I could not read. The fact was I needed glasses and I was put in the back of a classroom, and I remember it was times where it was my mom thought that I possibly would be retained in the first grade. And I do believe the staff at E.F. Swinney, you know, really boosted my academic achievement, as well as provided my mother with various resources such as Hooked on Phonics to work with me at home. The end result was that I was eventually going into my 6th grade year accepted into Lincoln Prep, which you actually had to have an academic achievement level to enter the program. I believed a lot of students, one thing I noticed at Lincoln Prep was that a lot of students I went to E.F. Swinney and Boker with were my classmates. I mean, I'm not trying to, I don't want to correlate it necessarily with being at a magnet school, but I felt that a lot of my classmates that I went to E.F. Swinney and Boker with attended Lincoln as well because they met the academic requirements. I do believe Lincoln was a multicultural school. It was not traditional as Central High School or Southeast High School at the time, and I believed I did receive possibly a far better education. As a result, I remember in high school that I had left Lincoln my freshman year, and I went to Purcell for 2 years. And when I went to Purcell for 2 years, well, I attended Purcell for 2 years before going back to Lincoln to graduate, I can recall that the academic rigor at Lincoln was far above the academic rigor at Purcell High School. And for me, it made me realize that really it was no equality in education. It's almost as if you don't go to Lincoln, you don't receive the same academic achievement or academic achievement rigor or academic rigor as you would receive at other local high schools. As you know, Lincoln Prep currently is the number one high school in the state of Missouri. A report came out in U.S. News earlier this year, and I just think about what about all the other high schools and what they're lacking. I believe it should be equality for all. The same rigorous courses, IB courses, AP courses that are offered at Lincoln Prep should be offered at all high schools within the inner city. And when you look at suburban districts, they don't have just one college prep school. All schools are offered those advanced placement courses. I believe some of the social outcomes at first could have been a culture shock. When you're just bused 2 or 3 hours, away, and I remember spending 2 hours on a bus, and if it was bad weather, it could be longer. I remember getting home sometimes, and my mother would get off from working at the State Building. She would get off work at 5:30 and sometimes beat me home. And I believe some of the social outcomes that resulted of the busing and various different things were more culture shock. No one told us how we should act or how we should receive a different race. But I would say I benefited from it. I attended a predominantly white institution at UMKC, and even at Lincoln Prep, a multicultural school at the time. I felt or had more diversity than the other high schools within the inner city. It allowed me and provided me with an opportunity to know how to interact with peers of a different race. And so I would say it was a good outcome because it allowed me to step outside the box, learn about different cultures, learn about different races, and be culturally responsive. I would say overall communities in Kansas City, I believe we're still divided today as we've ever been. I'll say the only difference is that we don't maybe call it desegregation no more, or we don't call it segregation. But if you look at the high schools, they're still segregated. It's predominantly African American within the inner city. You look at Northeast High School, you have probably approximately 2,000 students at Northeast High School speaking 40 different languages. That's the north end of Kansas City, and those pockets are, whether it's Somalian or Asian or different ethnicities, it's a melting pot. And you really think about the other communities in Kansas City, they're still segregated. You look at the predominantly white high schools, they're still predominantly white. You may have pockets in Lee Summit or pockets in Blue Springs where African Americans live there, but typically in those school districts, the African Americans who live there are typically the athletes, where they have been, I don't want to say apartment has been paid for them, but they've been recruited from the inner city to come play sports. So I do believe we're still segregated. One interesting movement with white flight that I'm interested to see as they continue to build up downtown in Kansas City, Missouri, is that we've now opened up a CSI lab and police station on 27th and Prospect, and now you're starting to see a lot of Caucasian and other races moving back inside of the inner city, and it almost seems as if the African Americans slowly but surely are going to be pushed out. They're now also starting a new project down off of 18th and Vine, where they're building a baseball stadium or a baseball academy. And I just wonder what's going to be the racial mix-up of that as they tear down the lower income housing project. So the community in Kansas City right now, I do believe, is about to shift. And I do believe African Americans are going to begin to slowly but surely continue to move or be pushed out south, as you see that Hickman School District and Grandview School District used to be predominantly white, but now they're predominantly African American. And so now the push has went further and further to Belton and Raymore, and it's now a push to where everyone is starting to move back in the inner city. So I do want to know the current probably racial demographics of Lincoln Prep, because I think we probably will find it very interesting. I believe in today's urban public schools resources, and I'll say resources over and over and over again. As an administrator, coming back to the Kansas City Public School District, I believe that's one thing that is lacking, is resources. Our schools are closing more and more. It's not due just necessarily to the charter school movement, but it's actually providing adequate resources, as well as teacher salaries. If you compare teacher salaries of the Kansas City Public School District with teacher salaries of Blue Springs or Blue Valley or Shawnee Mission, you'll see it's a far greater difference. And I know that every teacher goes into the profession to really make a difference and change lives. However, when the salaries have such an enormous gap and teachers are responsible for taking care of their families, some of the best teachers are actually recruited out to the suburban districts. And in that really causes a struggle for the inner city students. I believe that we should be putting more money in the inner city schools than we should be putting in the suburban schools. A few examples: if you drive out to some of the suburban schools, they look better than some college campuses around America. And when you drive by inner city schools, sometimes they look abandoned. And it's a battle that is constantly needed to be fought. And I feel like it's voices within the inner city that are unheard. I think we need to give back, but not only just give back, we need to go back and reach back. We need to reach back and we need to pull others up. It's about changing, as I would say, generational wealth, upward mobility. And that goes with resources. If we don't put resources inside of the inner city schools who need us the most, it's almost as if we're turning the cheek. I do believe somewhere along the line, the communities have forgotten, and as a people, as a whole, we have forgotten our responsibility, that we're not just so focused on our children, but all children are our responsibility. A lot of taxpayers' dollars typically should go to inner city schools, but a lot of times that budget does not find its way there. And a lot of students who go to private schools, parents, typically want the best for them, but instead of pouring their tax dollars and private school money into the public school system, they get a far better education sometimes because their parents are only worried about their education individually. My views, even coming from and having experience in charter schools, and not my former charter in particularly, but I do believe that is a movement that is beginning. That schools are beginning to be privatized. I do believe that it's a profit, and I do believe when thousands and thousands of dollars are being awarded to schools from state money, and in a lot of private schools, that goes to increasing teachers' salaries and district office salaries, and the money is not being really put into the students or put back into the school, then I do think it becomes a business. And students and educating children should never be a business. It should be something that we are morally obligated to do, and the money should be taken out of it. I feel, and sometimes I feel that the media or certain private institutions, are profiting. A lot of times, if you look at some institutions that are privatized or charter schools or various different things, you'll find certain salaries to be very interesting. As far as integration, I'm excited to be back home in Kansas City Public Schools. I can remember my memories as a student and graduating from Lincoln Prep in 2006, and now going back in as a administrator of a local elementary school. And I believe it's a good time to be within the district. I do think Kansas City Public Schools is the integration movement is definitely here. I'm not going to say that everyone is ready for it, but with neighborhoods changing, African Americans moving out to South Kansas City, and Caucasian and other races moving inside of the inner cities, we are going to see an interesting racial, as I would say, racial mix-up of demographics. And it's an exciting time. I think one thing that we need to be aware of is we need to be culturally responsive. Culturally responsive pedagogy is going to be very important. And actually being sensitive, sensitivity is going to be very important. And also offering probably parenting classes, as well as different outlets to promote change and to promote social justice, as well as to make it a welcoming environment. I do think it's a good time to be in Kansas City. You see a lot of racial mix-ups in Kansas City. For example, my son is biracial. And so if you go to different places across the United States, you don't see those kind of, as I would say, racial mix-ups that you see in the Midwest. And so I will say within Kansas City, it's a good time for integration. And I know we didn't, some people say we didn't get it right the first time, but history has a funny way of repeating itself. And this time around, I'm hoping we get it right.